You won't believe what Rebecca Lamb has to say about the drama that has finally come to light. The story of Rebecca Lamb and her husband JW is one of silence, secrecy, and immense pressure for years. The couple had been living with the weight of a non-disclosure agreement, and the Daystar Network has been rocked by an explosive revelation as Rebecca Lamb opens up about the tension behind closed doors in an emotional tell-all. She reveals the truth about the ongoing rift between Joni and Doug, shaking the very foundation of the Daystar family fans. According to reports, the NDA was so comprehensive that it covered more than just the usual business matters. It extended to personal family issues and sensitive internal network concerns. It prevented Rebecca and JW from discussing the allegations of sexual abuse involving their niece, Baby Lamb, which had allegedly been perpetrated by a family member named Pete. The NDA was not just a legal document, it was a barrier that prevented them from speaking out about one of the most painful and disturbing issues they had ever encountered. The couple was burdened both professionally and personally by Pete's disturbing behavior, including inappropriate physical interactions with Baby Lamb, and they were unable to discuss it because of the impending legal document. They watched as their family suffered, including the emotional turmoil that Jonathan and Susie Lamb went through in trying to protect Baby Lamb. Rebecca and JW were silenced because they were torn between being loyal to their family and the harsh reality of legal restrictions that prevented them from doing what they knew was right behind the scenes. According to reports, the pressure wasn't just legal. Rebecca and JW were fighting for their family, their financial stability, and their reputations, and the threat of losing their home added to their stress and anxiety, making it even harder for them to decide to speak up. However, the silence wasn't just about defending the family business, it was also about morality. Every day they had to live with the knowledge that they knew the truth but couldn't speak it. It weighed heavily on their hearts to know that the truth about what happened to Baby Lamb had to be kept hidden in order to protect the Lamb families and Daystar's public image. This was a devastating situation for them, placed their trust, integrity, and personal well-being on the line. However, it wasn't until Trey's Law, a legislative act that renders non-disclosure agreements (NDAs) unenforceable in child abuse cases, that Rebecca and JW were finally released from this oppressive silence. With the new law in place, the NDA could no longer stop them from speaking out about what they had seen, what they knew, and what they hoped would finally come to light. The silence had persisted for years, but now that they had the legal freedom to speak the truth, Rebecca and JW were able to start the process of exposing the unpleasant facts that had been kept hidden for so long. Involving non-disclosure agreements or NDAs, this law, which was recently passed in Texas, makes it clear that NDAs can no longer be used to silence victims of abuse or those who are trying to expose the truth. For years, NDAs were a powerful tool used by organizations, families, and even businesses to keep damaging information from becoming public. In many cases, however, they were used to keep the peace or maintain a public image, but in many cases they were used to hide the truth of child abuse and protect those who had committed heinous acts. The law was named after Trey, a young boy whose case served as a focal point for the legislation. Trey was sexually abused, and his case highlighted the abuse, and the impact of Trey's Law goes far beyond his case. It has a ripple effect on countless others who have been silenced by the weight of NDAs in situations involving abuse, especially when it involves minors. Trey's Law is significant not only because it addresses this specific issue, but also because it marks a turning point in how society deals with the silencing of victims. Families and organizations will no longer be able to use legal contracts to prevent victims from speaking out about the pain they've experienced. Trey's Law was a lifeline for Rebecca Lamb and her husband JW. For years, they had been unable to speak out about the upsetting events they had witnessed regarding Baby Lamb's abuse, because they were bound by an NDA, a legal contract that made it nearly impossible for them to publicly address what was happening within their family. The NDA not only protected the abuser but also kept the victims in silence, keeping them silent and serving as a constant reminder of their helplessness in a situation that was won. When Trey's Law was passed, it was as if a weight had been lifted off Rebecca and JW's shoulders. The law made it clear that NDAs could no longer be used to suppress the truth in cases of child abuse, giving them the legal freedom to speak out without fear of retaliation or legal consequences. It gave them the power to finally tell their story, share what they knew, and help bring the truth to light in a way that could lead to justice for Baby Lamb. The law also sent a strong message to organizations and families that have been using NDAs to silence the truth. Trey's Law has not only affected Rebecca and JW's situation, but also opened the door for other abuse victims to come forward without fear of legal retaliation. It has given many people who have been living in silence for far too long the strength to speak their truth and empowered them to protect themselves instead of their victims. One of the main features of Trey's law is that it specifically targets NDAs that were used to conceal information about child sexual abuse. This is a game changer because it puts the focus where it should be, on the protection of children and the necessity for the law guarantees that the voices of the most vulnerable are heard and that those who commit abuse are held accountable. It also emphasizes the importance of lawmakers and advocacy groups working together to create positive change. Tracy's law didn't just happen overnight. It was the result of years of hard work, advocacy, and a determination to protect children from the abuse and exploitation they have faced for far too long. Transparency in cases of abuse is a recognition that justice should not be delayed or obstructed because of a legal contract. Children should never be silenced, and their stories should never be hidden in the name of protecting an image or reputation. We're prepared to stand up to powerful forces for what was right, and this victory serves as a reminder that when the law is used to protect those who need it most, it can be a powerful tool for justice and change. For Rebecca and JW, the passing of Trey's law was a moment of hope, a chance to regain control of their story and finally stand up for what was right. But it also represented a larger battle. Their bravery in speaking out wasn't just about their own story, it was about giving a voice to all those who have been silenced by NDAs in cases of abuse. It was about shedding light on a system that has failed so many, and working to ensure that the same mistakes are not made in the future as more victims come forward and more stories are shared. Trey's law is turning into a ray of hope for people who have been kept in the dark for far too long. It's creating a future where justice is the top priority, and the truth can no longer be concealed behind legal agreements. Law is a powerful reminder that when people band together to fight for what is right, real change can happen, and those who have been wronged can finally find the justice they deserve. Rebecca Lamb had always led a life that appeared to be flawless to the public since she was the daughter of Daystar Television Network founders Marcus and Joni Lamb. Stranger to the spotlight, growing up surrounded by faith and the influence of a media empire, it seemed like everything she touched would turn to gold. However, behind the smiling faces and flashing lights of the camera, Rebecca was carrying a heavy burden that no one outside of her immediate circle knew about. The turmoil started when it was revealed that her young niece, Baby Lamb, had been horribly sexually abused by a family member who was trusted by the Lamb family and had a close relationship with Daystar. As the events unfolded, it became evident to Rebecca that something was seriously amiss, and she had a gut feeling that the family needed to take action. But that's when things became murky. However, what began as a family matter quickly spiraled into a much larger issue that involved not only Rebecca's family, but also the future of Daystar itself. The family member involved in the alleged abuse, Pete, was close to the Lamb family, which made the situation even more complicated. Rebecca knew that speaking out about what she had witnessed would not be easy because her family had a reputation to protect, and the Lambs were highly influential figures in the Christian television world at the time. The pressure to keep quiet was immense. As the details came to light, Rebecca was torn between her loyalty to her family and the unavoidable truth that something terrible had happened. Her emotional struggle was further exacerbated by the pressure to remain silent at the time. According to reports, Rebecca and JW were pressured by Marcus and Joni Lamb to sign a non-disclosure agreement (NDA) that prohibited them from discussing any of the abuse allegations publicly. This NDA was not just a standard confidentiality agreement, but the NDA, although legally binding, was more than just a piece of paper. It served as a reminder that silence was expected regardless of the personal toll it was taking on Rebecca. It was a battle between her faith, her loyalty to her family, and her moral compass. She had always been taught that family was everything, and the Lamb family was no exception. It was used to prevent them from talking about the upsetting events that were happening within their own family. It felt like a betrayal of the very people they had trusted, and it left Rebecca feeling trapped. Rebecca started to wonder if keeping quiet was really the right course of action when the truth about what had happened to Baby Lamb was so obviously painful. Despite the emotional strain, Rebecca continued to pray for Baby Lamb and for justice. She had moments of clarity when she realized that standing up for what was right at all costs was the right thing to do, but she was afraid of what speaking out might do to her family and her own life. For Rebecca, this became an agonizing internal conflict because it wasn't just about the potential legal repercussions, it was also about the impact that the truth would have on Daystar's reputation. Meanwhile, her husband, JW, who had seen some of Pete's disturbed behavior, wrote a letter to Jonathan Lamb, Rebecca's brother, expressing his concerns. JW detailed disturbing incidents he had seen, such as inappropriate behavior from Pete toward Baby Lamb. He could not ignore what he had witnessed, and his letter was his attempt to ensure that someone would take the matter seriously. However, despite the mounting evidence of abuse, the Lamb family seemed to brush the concerns under the rug, and the situation continued to be handled in a way that left Rebecca and JW feeling betrayed and powerless. What made things even more difficult for Rebecca was the emotional toll it was taking on her, who maintained harmony and who, in spite of everything, believed in the possibility of forgiveness and redemption. But as the accusations against Pete grew, Rebecca found herself doubting everything she had ever believed in. She had trusted her family and her faith, but now those foundations were being shaken by a betrayal that she couldn't ignore. As the situation developed, Rebecca noticed odd changes in the dynamics of the family. Her sister Rachel, who was also involved in the matter, allegedly warned Rebecca that speaking out could cost her family their home, a threat that hung over Rebecca and JW. Even though the stakes were extremely high and the consequences of speaking out seemed insurmountable, what would happen to Daystar and their family's ministry, for example? Rebecca felt that the truth had to be revealed. She felt that Baby Lamb's voice had to be heard regardless of the consequences, but the idea of doing so publicly seemed like an impossible decision. The world may have looked at Rebecca and her family as pillars of faith, but behind the scenes she knew the truth, and it was far darker than anyone could have imagined. The NDA. The pressure and the overwhelming silence weighed heavily on Rebecca, and she continued to struggle with the decision to speak out, knowing the Lamb family's future, Daystar's future, and even her own future were all tied to the secrets that had been buried for so long. But how could she live with herself if she didn't do something? The growing tension in Rebecca's life was made worse by the realization that she couldn't remain silent indefinitely. Her faith told her to stand up for justice and protect the innocent, but she was afraid of upsetting her family and ruining everything they had built, so it was nearly impossible for her to take the first step. Rebecca's internal conflict continued as the silence persisted, and she was forced to consider how loyal she was to her family. As the daughter of Marcus and Joni Lamb, the founders of Daystar Television Network, Rebecca Lamb had always been known for her strong faith and her dedication to her family. Although she was well known in the public eye, she carried a burden that no one outside of her immediate circle truly understood behind the scenes. For years, she had kept a painful secret involving her niece Baby Lamb and a disturbing series. These questions haunted Rebecca as she tried to navigate her way through the mess of secrets, lies, and unspoken truths of events that no one could have predicted. It all began when Rebecca noticed that a family member, Pete, who worked at Daystar and was closely related to the Lamb family, was acting troublingly. Over time, her suspicions grew stronger as she started to witness incidents that made her feel uneasy. In particular, when it came to Baby Lamb, Pete appeared to have crossed boundaries that should never have been crossed. At first, Rebecca was unsure of what to do because she had always been taught to protect her family and to keep the peace, but the situation became too serious to ignore. She confided in her husband, JW, who also shared her growing concerns. Together, they realized the seriousness of the situation, but they also knew that speaking out could have disastrous consequences. The family, particularly Marcus and Joni, were deeply invested in preserving Daystar's reputation, and Rebecca knew that disclosing the truth could destroy the image they had worked so hard to build. The couple's internal conflict became even more complicated when they were allegedly coerced into signing a non-disclosure agreement (NDA) by Marcus and Joni. According to sources close to the matter, the NDA went far beyond standard confidentiality agreements and effectively silenced Rebecca and JW, forbidding them from talking about anything about Baby Lamb's abuse or the events that led up to it. The NDA served as a tool to protect the family's reputation and to keep the truth from being revealed to the public. Rebecca felt trapped because she had always believed in the importance of justice and the power of transparency, but now she was being asked to keep quiet. The silence was deafening, and it weighed heavily on her conscience, but as time passed, she couldn't get rid of the feeling that she was betraying not only Baby Lamb but also herself. She was living in constant fear that the truth was being buried, even though she knew that speaking out was the right thing to do. Rebecca felt helpless to do so because of the intense pressure from her family, especially her mother Joni, to keep quiet. Joni had always been a strong and determined person, and Rebecca had always looked up to her, but now she was conflicted about how she could watch her niece suffer in silence while being bound by a legal agreement that seemed to protect the wrong people. The tension continued to build within Rebecca as she struggled with her faith and her loyalty to her family. She had always been taught to trust in God's plan and believe that everything would work out in the end, but as things became more dire, Rebecca started to doubt everything she had ever believed, happening while being forced to keep quiet about it. The guilt consumed her, and the fear of what might happen if she broke the silence was overwhelming. It wasn't until Trey's Law, a new piece of legislation passed in the state of Texas, had a profound impact on cases involving child sexual abuse. The law specifically targeted the misuse of non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, in situations where abuse was involved. Under this new law, Rebecca and JW were no longer bound by the NDA that had kept them silent for so long. The law gave them a legal avenue to finally share what they knew, to speak the truth about what had happened to baby Lamb, without fear of legal repercussions. For the first time, the weight of the NDA had been lifted, and Rebecca and JW were free to speak out and reveal the truth that had been kept hidden for years. They no longer had to live in fear of punishment for speaking the truth, and Lamb was ready to cross the fence with him. Rebecca knew that speaking out would have consequences. It would hurt her family, it would shake the foundation of Daystar, and it would put their entire ministry in jeopardy. But she also knew that she couldn't keep quiet any longer. The truth had to be heard. She couldn't live with herself if she remained silent. Speaking out about baby Lamb's abuse was not an easy decision. It was a heartbreaking and painful one that would alter her life and the lives of those around her, but it was a necessary one. By speaking out, Rebecca hoped to not only expose the truth but also bring justice to baby Lamb, who had suffered in silence for far too long. The pain that she had carried for so long now had a way out, and Rebecca was ready to take that step.